Welcome to another edition of the Australian Muscle Car Magazine podcast series. This is Ray Berghouse, and today's conversation is going to be a little bit unusual in many ways. Both of today's personalities have had long and illustrious careers as journalists in the media side of the sport. Both have been drivers. One's been a magazine publisher, a team owner, and they've travelled the world looking at all sorts of events, driving all sorts of wonderful motor cars, everything from a Fiat 500 to a Ferrari F40. Their combined knowledge of cars, drivers and events is extensive. The two gents having their tyres pumped up this afternoon are Peter McKay and Phil Christensen, and it's my pleasure today to introduce both of them to you. Gents, every one of these conversations starts with the question, how did you get your start in motor racing? But in this case, it's how did you get your start in motor racing journalism? And I guess Peter's the senior one, at least that's what Phil says. So we're going to start asking Peter. Peter, how did you get your start?
It's good to get going on an ageist scenario. That's great.
Excellent.
I got into journalism via motorsport because I was racing speedway cars and it just seemed logical. Up till then I'd been playing around with rock music and stuff like that. But once I got into speedway, I thought, I'll start writing about motorsport, speedway specifically, and that's how I got going. Ultimately, I ended up with newspapers and a broader career with General Motoring. But yeah, the introduction was through grassroots motorsport.
Yeah, well, grassroots, certainly in terms of speedway, grassroots is, that's where the dirt hits the wall. So you were a competitor, and then you spoke to somebody in the media. Was it newspapers that you got your start in? I assume it was.
I started with speedway magazines, but then I had a flatmate who was working as a journalist with the Canberra Times. Rupert began the Australian, and he suggested I should apply for a job there. And that's how I got into the newspapers. It took a while to become, a qualified journalist, but that's how I got going, and very happy that through the coming years I got to do a whole range of different things, not just motorsport, but general motoring, all the other stuff that goes with it.
Mm. Well, Phil, you're the next man in line.
Howdy, Ray. Howdy.
We're here. Same question for you. I mean, you were a newspaper journalist. I think, was it in motoring that you started, or was it in general newspaper duties?
Definitely in motoring I started, because as a school kid, 14 years of age, coming from a family that bristled with professional journalists. Dad was a great sporting writer, did 6 Olympic Games, did a whole lot of stuff in rugby league, published the weekly program for them, and he weaseled me into a post as the reporter for the Sun Herald at the Showground Speedway, Sydney Showground Speedway, which in the 60s, very early 60s, was big time. It was a nighttime motorsport, a nighttime sport in the heart of Sydney, which in those days, on a Saturday night or Friday night, the only thing that you saw under lights was Harold Park trots or Wentworth Park dogs. There was no sporting facilities that catered for night sport except the Sydney Showground. And the Sydney Showground had, in those days, a ribbon of light around them, not overhead spotlighting like they have now, the space age lighting that illuminates rugby league games and everything else that now happens primarily at night, including cricket. So I was a 14-year-old, I was a high school student, and every Saturday night I took myself to the showground and covered it for the Sun Herald. They took 2 stories, a 9 o'clock story and then a wrap-up with the feature race, and until the place closed in, I think, 1989, I was there nearly every night, every Saturday night. did nothing for my social standing, but I got to learn a bit about speedway, and from there I sort of morphed into motor racing in general. The days of Warwick Farm and places like that were going big time, and that's how I made it through.
It's funny you should talk about that in those terms, because I can clearly remember in the 60s, early 60s, mid-60s, around about the Tasman Series time in February, when all the internationals came out for the Tasman Series races, Saturday night, you go out to the showground for the Speedway, and every driver, the Sterling Mosses, the Jack Brabhams, the Denny Holmes, the Jim Clarks, they're all out there watching the Speedway cars. They'd been practicing on Saturday. They were going to race tomorrow, but they were out there watching the other guys. And that's where we saw people like Johnny Harvey turn up.
Yeah, it was an important venue, a significant venue, and in terms of entertainment, the crowds that they got, 6,000 and 8,000 people on a Saturday night, not the 35,000s that people still talk about, they're myths, but the place did hold 19 or 20,000 chock-a-block, and an average crowd, like on an ordinary Saturday night, was anything between 3,000 and 5,000 or 6,000 people, spectators. And that's at a time when a rugby league game, the Western Suburbs Magpies or the Balmain Tigers, North Sydney Bears, they, quite often had crowds of 1,500 to 2,000. So this was a major attraction, major draw card.
Mm. So moving on from where you started from, we'll go back to Peter. Peter, you worked in newspapers for quite a long time. You covered, how many Bathurst would you have covered? Rough guess.
I think the first was about 1975, and I haven't done the last few, but I did most of them all the way through to 2010, I guess. Yeah.
So you raced at Bathurst quite a lot. We'll come back to some, let's call them anecdotal stories about Bathurst a little later. But tell us about your career as a race driver at Bathurst, because you drove, a lot of events. You drove with a lot of very well-known drivers as co-driver. Pull out a couple of memories from that whole era.
Well, the first race at Bathurst was 1981, and the way that came about, Brian Callaghan, who was a terrific fella and an even better speedway racer, decided he'd go circuit racing, and he built an XD Falcon. And in the late 70s, he said to me out at Liverpool Speedway one night, he said, I'm thinking about building a car for Bathurst, and I'd like you to race with me. You think that's nice of him, but I'm not holding it to him. And then in 1981, I had a phone call in March. G'day mate, Brian here. What are you doing in October? And that was him following up what he thought was a watertight promise, but I didn't, and just confirming that we were going to race at Bathurst later that year. So pretty nice of him, saying, I didn't expect him to, just to have me along, because it wasn't like we were bosom buddies or anything like that. We were just, we were friends, but not really close. And that's how we ended up at Bathurst, two speedway wankers, as he tended to describe us. And that was the race that was prematurely stopped with a big shunt on top of the mountain at the Philomie. And we finished 14th and the first all-rookie team home. So that was a pretty nice outcome.
It's funny when you say you finished 14th. I mean, back in those days when the ARDC were running the event, they had 55 starters and they had anything between 5 and 10 reserves. So if you were 14th out of 55, that's a pretty good result for a couple of casuals.
Speedway wankers.
That'll do, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that was great. And I've always said about those enduros, the greatest thing you can do is get a terrific co-driver. And I was really lucky, apart from Brian, I drove with Kevin Bartlett, Graham Moore, John Smith, Brocky in a couple of 12 hours, Peter Boyle in a 24-hour race. I'm wheel spinning. But you get the drift, quite a few pretty handy pedallers. And they were the Bates brothers and one Fangio,
the nephew.
The nephew didn't quite crack it for a drive with his grandfather or his uncle or whatever it was. And, most of those guys were so handy, they gave me plenty of seat time and just said, get comfortable, and that's all you can hope for.
So you're really you're a race driver, co-driver, masquerading as a journalist.
I'm in the mix there. I've got to say, I always preferred racing and driving cars to writing about them. Big admission, but that's certainly the case. I allowed my journalistic career to get me into spots that I would have had to have paid a lot of money to do otherwise.
I think that's every journalist. Let's call it the goal, the golden child exercise, where somebody else pays you to do what you would otherwise have paid to do.
Yeah, I have paid once. I paid $8,000 to get a seat in a VTEC Civic in the 24-hour race at Nürburgring. And my wife, my partner, was very generous. She said, yeah, you've got a lot out of motorsport, go for it. But that's the only time.
Congratulations.
Your former partner.
Yes. Yes. Okay, back to you, Phil. In the context of your career, which has spanned, 30, 40 years, I guess, in the game, I'm not going to try and do this chronologically because we'd be chopping and changing all over the place. You had a pretty close relationship working with Mike Raymond when Channel 7 originally was the motor racing telecaster for the country. How did that come about? Was that again through Speedway because Mike was a Speedway man and you just sort of got sucked along into motor racing in that fashion? Well,
going back on what I was talking about earlier, I tended to babble, but I was only doing journalism as a weekend job, the same way that a kid my age would have been selling newspapers on Sunday morning. But I moved on to become a failed journalist. A failed lawyer, law student. I made the natural progression to taxi driving during the Vietnam War, which was pretty interesting up around the cross. And I got a call from the Sun Herald and the Sydney Morning Herald to fill in for a journalist who was their rugby writer and who was heading off to the Munich Olympics in '72. So I joined the Herald, and part of my gig was to write rugby, which I was no expert on. I was a rugby league. I grew up with rugby league, and also I suggested that they could use my talents as a motorsport correspondent as well, which was the way it all happened. But that's where it eventually got me.
So where did the sort of the crossover into television take place?
No, well, I wasn't heavy with Mike in terms of his television work. I was a buddy of his and a Speedway confidant, and we used to share bottles of Matus of a Friday night. But I never worked terribly long hours with him in respect to his television work. He came from Speedway and he landed via the ABC. He landed on Channel 7's doorstep, and he and Evan Green conducted warfare with the other channels, and to put Channel 7 as the number one motorsport broadcaster, and it went from there. I made trips overseas with Mike and shared lots and lots of time with him and his good family. And but he was again a silent partner in a publication that we put out on the topic of Speedway, where he was able to write all his political stuff, and I was able to do the description of the sport. And I was with him till his death a couple of years back. Interesting individual, absolute character. Used to declare opposition to a lot of people, and it was not good to be on the opposite side when he started to
express his disapproval.
Express his disapproval, but a highly clever individual coming from an area that I don't think anyone in the sport has ever matched. He was not a competitor, but he understood what needed to be done at that side, but at the same time, as an entrepreneur, an impresario of Speedway, if there's ever such a person, it was certainly him.
Yeah, I think we all have fond memories of Mike, both black and white. He was, as you say, a true character for years and years and years. Peter, going back to you again, somebody like yourself, you've written how many stories, hundreds, possibly thousands of stories for magazines, newspapers. Is there one that stands out? Because, I mean, every journalist has the scoop of their career. Newspaper journalists are always about scoops, about getting the story first. But the longer form journalism in magazines and so on requires the same degree of diligence. Now, where does it come down with you? What was the favourite thing in your memory that you wrote that you still remember most fondly?
It's all a blur. It's all a blur. You're right. I've written thousands of stories, but I never considered myself a beat-up merchant or a scoop merchant. I just wrote, hopefully to entertain and inform, and that was the criteria each time I put some paper in a typewriter or turned the screen on. I can honestly say nothing stands out. Maybe it was just my mediocrity that just flowed through everything. But no.
Yes, A-grade mediocrity. Yeah, okay, we'll call it that. Okay. So, I mean, if that's the case, then you like Phil, like all of us in this game, we are all people with memories about things that happened that we just live on memories. And I'm going to come back to you in a minute with questions about memory. But I'm going back to Phil now because you mentioned your Speedway magazine. You also owned Checkered Flag magazine for quite a long time, run out of a very posh little stone cottage in Paddington. Too long, was it? How did that start? How did you end up owning that?
Diabolical luck, I guess. No, Barry Lake, our good departed friend, he founded Checkered Flag in the mid-70s, I think. It went through a sequence of owners and was eventually edited by Nick Munting and owned by a printing group who had a few invoices unanswered, so they took possession of the publication. It bobbed along for a while. It was about to fold, really, and I got to talking with Nick and suggested that maybe I could inject a small amount of funds into it, and we'd go with that. I was still working at the Sun newspaper at the time, so it was a part-time job for me. Eventually, Nick took off, and I was left with it, and we produced it for another few years, and sort of tried to change it from being a race report type bulletin to side issues and different aspects, and the different columns that were written by different people: Kevin Bartlett, John Smith, George Tatnell, with his ghostwriter sitting alongside us. So it was good fun. It was. We had Gary Patterson writing a column. He was a the hostile hippie, a crazy sprint car driver from the United States. Everyone had a good little go at it, but it was done with a degree of humour and also more of an insight into the sport rather than turgid race reports from every meeting that in those days used to happen everywhere. All over the countryside there was a race meeting coming on, and by the time we got to publish as a monthly, the news was all old hat.
Yeah, that's if you would, going back to the early 60s when Racing Car News first started, Racing Car News became the Bible because it recorded every event at every event.
Exactly,
so if there were 15 events on the day, there was a story on every event.
So we were looking to be an alternate.
Yeah, more of a features magazine
exactly.
than a news magazine.
Exactly.
Did you enjoy that whole process, or was it just a pain?
Oh, I enjoyed it immensely. There's a lot of things I've done that have brought me great enjoyment and satisfaction. Financially, it was a struggle. It didn't sell big time. We had in those days we had good advertising from the dastardly tobacco industry because they were heavily into motorsport. By the time it had passed out of my hands, the oil companies hadn't come in, which is what they did in the late 80s. So it was every edition was a struggle to sort of break even, and the big seller was the Bathurst Preview edition, which was September, and then October, which was the wrap up, was about half the circulation. People all went to Bathurst thinking they were a chance, and all their fans and their followers and supporters went there, and all their sponsors. So the Christmas edition, if you want to call it that way, was the September issue, which was the Bathurst Preview.
Yeah, I think that's been the way for a very, very long time, ever since Bathurst sort of got underway as a major event in the sort of mid-60s. But I think really from a publishing point of view, having had a lot of experience in that area myself, I know what it's like. I mean, Bathurst is the Holy Grail. And in terms of circulation, people want to know what's going to happen, but after it's happened, they're not quite as interested.
I'll tell you another point. I always thought our best, and some of our rivals didn't see it that way. They thought that if someone was prepared to contribute, that they could find their way onto the front cover. My attitude was the best ad you've got is what's sitting on the newsstand. Now, that sort of painted us into a picture because every time we took touring cars, V8s, off the front cover and put a Grand Prix car on the front cover, the sales dropped. Once, for I don't know, for whatever reason, it was a beautiful Bill Forsyth photo and I thought it should be the cover shot, was a historic car running around Amaroo Park, and that was a real clanger. But this aspect of who you put on the front cover, so then it becomes, well, if you put Peter Brock on the cover, you're going to do really well. If you put someone else driving a Commodore or a Tirana in those days, sales won't be as great. And the biggest hero of the lot was Dick Johnson. But you can't bring out a monthly magazine with Dick Johnson on the cover 12 times in a row.
It kind of reminds me of the stories at Women's Weekly where the covers that sold the most magazines either had the Queen on the cover, one of the royal family.
We tried the Queen one month, yeah.
Or the third alternative with Women's Weekly was corgi dogs.
Yeah, no. That's what the formula is. You've got to find out what your audience is and hit it. But the repetition of a Dick Johnson car coming at you, 12 times in a row is just overkill.
Yeah.
And obviously you've got to service the rest of the sporting community, the motorsport community, and give some heroes their well-earned due.
Yeah. Going back to Peter again. Peter, as a driver, you were in the thick of production racing back in the mid-'80s. There was the Pulsar series that was sponsored by Nissan. From memory, that was pretty close to a crash fest, wasn't it? It was more like a speedway exercise because there was an awful lot of give and take and an awful lot of swapping panel work.
Yeah, that was carnage. They had, I think from memory, 11 professional race and rally drivers in the field. and me. And it started off pretty well for me because I won the first round at Amaroo Park, after which Alan Grice came up to me and said, "You block me again, Sunshine, and you're going over the wall."
That sounds sort of okay, yeah.
Sure it was Alan Grice?
And, the subsequent series was still pretty willing. John Bow tipped me over at Amaroo at the next round. I was going fine until I slid off and hit one of Ivan's big tractor tyres on the infield up at Bitchapave, and over I went. Sharon, my partner in the press room, she went hunting for John, who was told that she was ropeable, and he didn't go near the press room for 3 years. That series ended, I think, and I'm relying on memory here, at Calder with Gricey and Jim Richards in the hunt to win outright. And Gricey had made a few enemies on the way, and when the flag dropped or the lights changed or whatever at Calder...
At Amaroo. Oh, it's at Calder, wasn't it? This was the last round. That's right. Sorry.
The last round. Everybody bar Jim Richards made a beeline for Alan Grice. It was like he had a big target on him. So Grice finished nowhere and Jim won the series. So I guess there is your comeuppance.
Yes, well, I mean, the thing is that I think Gricey was one of those drivers who believed in the phrase from that horrible American NASCAR movie, rubbin's racing. There were it was a lot of rubbing in those days. Some fairly forceful rubbing, I might say.
Yeah, he was a very quick, very good race driver, and he evolved over time into becoming a terrific setter-up of cars. He could turn the basic motor car into a real weapon on the track. We got on quite well in our older years, but there were times back then when probably didn't love each other.
Those one-make series were a recipe for interesting racing because you got professionals who knew exactly what they were doing in cars they didn't own. They walked away from them on Sunday. They went back to the Alfa Romeos or to the Nissans or whoever provided them. So they just treated them as play toys. They got in with serious amateurs who, devoted much time and attention to their race cars. And I can remember one meeting at Amaroo where Johnson and Colin Bond tipped each other over and were disputing stuff in the pits and screaming and shrieking and pointing and it was all the pros in these baby cars, these noddy cars that unfortunately didn't belong to them, so they treated them with scant respect.
It's funny, that whole question of one-make racing, when you think about it, and there's been numerous exercises. There's been Renault 12, there's been Mazda 3, there's been Pulsars.
Renault 12, there's a vague reference there to someone who drove his Renault 12 home from Adelaide International Raceway to Sydney with no front windscreen.
I wonder who that was.
I wonder who it was. Well,
no, I can't.
If you could see behind the goggles he was wearing.
Peter?
I had a few moments in the Renault series, but pretty enjoyable.
Particularly in Adelaide.
Good drivers, Russell Norden, Robin Hamilton. Yeah, some pretty handy drivers.
Who was the lawyer?
Nick Lettingham.
Nick Lettingham, yeah.
The problem with that series, the Renault 12 is probably not your first choice of race weapon.
I would not have thought so.
And what they did, they put some Formula Renault sticky Michelin tyres on them. So when you got them remotely sideways, they had a tendency to get up on two wheels or worse. So you had to be on your on your metal to keep them...
Spit their windscreens out.
To keep, tyres down all the time, wheels down.
Yes, yeah. But what I was leading to with this one-make series, you think about the Triumph TR7 series at Amaru Park and so on. I think the last of those one-make series of a major nature was the one for the Ford Laser. And that's where we actually saw Mark Scaife come to the fore as a kid. But what I was leading to was that those one-make series really ran on a 3-year basis. The first year, you had about 6 or 8 different winners. The second year, people got to know the car a lot better, and there were 2 or 3 winners. And in the third year, it was almost always just one winner, right? Because as the cars developed, the drivers became much more expert at that particular car, which is a bit of a shame, really. But, it was great. It was terrific viewing for the people at the circuit and for television. No. So, did you compete in any other of those one-make series, or just the Renaults? Oh, hang on, the Renaults and the Nissans, of course, the Pulsars.
Yeah. I had a few guest drives in the Mirage Cup, was it? Is that it?
Yes, yeah.
You coached some of the celebrities in the Grand Prix
I did that
version of the one-make series.
Yeah, I did that for a lot of years. That was good fun, dealing with egos and celebrities, some of which were
Molly Meldrum, perhaps.
Not under my tutelage, but we had a.
Well, come on, name some celebrities.
You want a bit of
big
scandal,
name,
do you?
Kylie? What was Kylie?
Clive James.
Danny Minogue, didn't she drive at one stage? Seriously? I think she had a gallop at one stage.
Yeah, again, not in mine, not on my watch, but a few singers. Natalie Imbruglia, she was tasty, and Barry Humphries.
Now, Dane Ebner. Oh my God!
That's right.
Before the sessions began down in Adelaide, I was asked, because I was based in Sydney, if I could take Barry out to Eastern Creek, because he'd been sitting in the back seats of chauffeur-driven cars for so long, big chance he'd forgotten how to drive and only drove autos anyway, and these cars, whatever they were that year, were manual. So I picked him up at the park, out we went, and spent a few hours at Eastern Creek, and my parting words were, look, I know you're pretty shit, but you will improve. He didn't.
Well, that just goes to show you weren't not necessarily his best trainer.
I was, but he wasn't the best
learner,
yeah. You know the follow-up story that in the race in Adelaide, he had a panic attack. Crompton, who was another driver trainer, had to sit alongside him and change gears for him while he, tried to
fumbled around the circuit.
And it wasn't pretty.
No lap records that day.
No, absolutely not. Well, I'm going to switch back to Phil now. Phil, you had about a 3 or 4 year time frame, close association with the Mazda RX-7. Now, you ran a team for Stephen Brook in production car racing. You ran a car with Ghostbuster sponsorship at Bathurst. I'm just going to throw it over to you and say, tell us about Mazdas and racing and being a team owner, team manager, team checkbook owner. You're the guy who was paying the bills.
Yeah, well, my greatest friend in motor racing, my mentor and my generous master of the watch was Alan Moffat. I did a lot of work with Alan over the years, and he was a strong personal friend, struggling at the moment, of course, as we know. But he was the Mazda man, and I was assisting him with some press releases and publicity. and I travelled with him quite extensively, but never at any stage did I have an aspiration to take on ownership of a race team or do anything like that. It was the furthest thing from my mind. For whatever reason, I got involved with the opportunity that I saw in 1984. It was the end of Group C, and Group A was about to befall us, rightly or wrongly. So there were people panicking in the ranks of the car owners and the teams, and they were disposing of their vehicles as quickly as they could before they became obsolete. And this included dispatching some of them prior to Bathurst, which was, to me, was not comprehensible, because this was to be the farewell, the grand finale. You know, you'd want to be in it. Anyway, there was 2 or 3 of these vehicles being offered around, and one of them that was offered around was a vehicle that had been the ex-Barry Jones RX-7, won a heap of races at Amaroo Park, including the Amaroo 300 with Barry Jones and Alan Jones, F1 Alan Jones, Jones and Jones. And this had been out of Barry Jones's hands for a year or so. The guy who bought it installed Bob Morris, former Bathurst winner, in it, and ran a season touring car championships, won the Oran Park round and set the all-time lap record there on that particular configuration. And it was on the market. It was on the market because the guy had gone into receivership, the people that had run it for Morris, and I went and looked at the car, and it was out at Birkenhead Point in a financier's building. It was sitting there like a museum piece. Came with no spares, nothing except the wheels it stood on, and it was at a really good price that I thought, except that I didn't have money. I was totally unfunded. I was struggling with checkered flag, paying a tiny mortgage on a tiny property in Paddington, and the last thing I thought, because of our relationship with Checkered Flag, we had some interesting advertisers that might see their way clear to going to Bathurst, and that's how it occurred. So we bought the car, and Peter McKay, sitting opposite, was going to be number 2 driver to Barry Jones, who offered to get involved with his old car, get it back in shape, and go to Bathurst for one last shot. Then at midnight one evening, the phone rings, and it's Bob Morris, former Bathurst winner, who had driven this car for the previous 12 months and knew it backwards. He said, who's the second driver? And I said, well, I've got someone in mind. He said, could I put my hat in the ring, because I think that car can win. Now, I had no expectations of us ever taking on the Moffat, Stuyvesant RX-7 team, of which I was a lover of, or the Brock team, or Dick Johnson. There was no possibility in the world, in my mind. But I was interested in his version, his opinion. We engaged him as the second driver, and then I'm then left.
He's given me the arse.
And then a
touring car champion and Bathurst winner comes along, and I'm out.
My conscience is giving me a rough trot.
But only to that.
What have I done to my good friend McKay? So this is someone who, as I said, totally underfunded. No funds whatsoever. No Ziggy Forrest in the background. No big sponsors, nothing, starting from scratch. So I thought, well, we'd better get a second car. Let's double down. This is good. This is fun, being a team owner. So
bankruptcy, here we come. We
found another vehicle in Tasmania that was going through the same rejection syndrome as the others. And it was a brand new race car, had run the previous Sandown 500 in 1983. I think it only completed 12 laps and went back into this. It was like a brand new car. So we leased that, and with an option to purchase, which I later took up. And McKay and Graham Moore were the postilions there. And then we had to go and find more sponsors, and so that's where we stumbled across Ghostbusters, who at the time was an unknown brand. There was absolutely no knowledge of what that meant. It was a coming movie, and certainly it wasn't screened before Bathurst. And we actually got paid to put one of the world's great logos and identifiable images. We got paid dollars to put it on our car. I don't think anyone in the world is. I mean, if you did it today, you'd be straight into the law courts to explain your actions and pay up a licence fee. So it was good fun.
So, I mean, that sort of gets you to you're now a team owner. You have two cars.
We had prior to that we had run the Perrier Alpha with Stephen Brook, who won his class in Group E 24 times out of 24, and we then got into the Group E Perrier RX7, which was a bit of a mind wrestle because we'd sold the first sponsorship to Perrier on the basis that we were going to be running a European car, Italian, not French, but don't let on, and then to go to a Japanese-built motor vehicle was a bit of a push, but it was a great project and brought great results. It was very successful. Stephen Brook, a very underrated driver, modest by half when you realise some of the cowboys that were running around in those days and getting good drives. He was a stand-back merchant, unfortunately, and could have done a lot better than what he did. But in our days, he was excellent. He prepared the car. He and a guy called Derek Heiler, they prepared the car up in Nelson, up very close to Amaru Park, and we took it all over the countryside and won heaps of races.
It's interesting you say Perrier, because we're now talking the time when Perrier as a brand was the first bottled water on the Australian market. And I can remember having a conversation with the boss at Shelley's Soft Drinks, who were the distributors, importers and distributors. And I asked him the question, I said,
Steve Muter,
you are importing water in bottles all the way from France. Who on earth is going to buy a bottle of water at about 5 times the price?
Exactly. And I mean, you question that even today. A bottle of water is dearer than a bottle of fruit juice.
Or milk.
Or milk, yeah, exactly.
So, I mean,
it was a great drop, and I still, to this day, I still have my loyalty.
I can imagine. So
you're not going to get them again.
Not thinking that way now.
So,
and you're not getting to drive if I do.
So where do we go from there? Now we're on the cusp of going to Bathurst in 1984, the last year of Group C, the year of the Brock Big Bangers. It was, it was the year for a long, long time, before and after. Now, what happened at Bathurst that year? Tell us all about it. Good, bad and indifferent.
This is where I click on vague, but our good friend Ivan Stibbard, who was the secretary of the race meeting, he plonked us in pit number 3 and 4. Moffat, Peter Stuyvesant Mazda was 1 and 2, and Brock Marlborough was 5 and 6. So here were the poor boys, the Wallies from Paddington, who did not have the faintest idea what they were doing, sitting between the two greatest race teams probably in Australian motor racing history up till the turn of the century. Obviously, there have been some pretty hot operations since then. But here we were, and we figured in the pit stop competition, and we figured in a whole lot of things. I was working on the coming edition. I didn't get up there to take in all of the pre-race activity. A couple of things I remember. We had Stephen Gore, the motocross guy. He was a brand ambassador for Toshiba. He was up there with us. We had some really good people with us, very dedicated, but unsung, and Barry Jones, who did the work on both the cars, prepared them. He was suffering from, not suffering, but he was persisting with kidney failure, and every second day of his life he spent on a dialysis machine. Yeah. So the week of Bathurst, he was this guy who was the centrepiece of the whole operation, heading down to Sydney for the whole day. An interesting sidebar. I'm sure the family would not have any problems with me discussing it, but he was a really good operator and could pedal as well. The day of the race, we had the two cars. The second car was this former race winner, big-time race winner, which was sponsored by WB1, a division of Repco, and that was the Morris car. Anyway, Bob was he got round pretty well in practice and qualifying, and then we made it into the top 10 for Hardy's Heroes or something shootout or whatever they called it in the day. And that was the top 10 qualifying spots, one lap shootout. It persists till this day and is very, very good television. So I wake up on the Saturday morning and in Bathurst it is snowing. I think that's not a good omen, is it? So Bob goes out to make his time, one lap screamer, miscues on a couple of corners. We're ninth on the grid alongside the Walkinshaw Goss Jaguar, which come race day and drop of the flag does not move. Doesn't move until someone, the Tesserero Camaro, punts him up the rear end. Everyone else has taken off, including our cars, both our vehicles. Barry Jones, who was driving the first leg, he said that the mistake he made was when drama occurs like that, he usually slams in the clutch to take off any pressure. Anyway, he got clipped by another vehicle and he was still fully engaged with gear. So that destroyed its chances. It did another 5 laps when they restarted the race, and then it was back in the pits. That was the end of car 1. Car 2 was the Ghostbusters car, which Graham Moore started proceedings in, the first leg, and he handed over to Peter, and between them they ran quite a few laps. Over 100, and eventually retired. So that was the end of our day. And apart from that, my mind is totally blank. I've worked hard to keep it that way. Yes. It was certainly my last effort at major team ownership. I wasn't going to graduate to the Formula One Constructors Association or any of those august bodies.
Well, I can say one thing, and that is that you achieved more than most of us have even thought about, even if it was for just one weekend. I mean, to roll up there...
It does, truly, looking back on one car, no funding, no. I mean, I had zero in the bank, whatever the working account was for the magazine. It would have been a couple of $1,000 or something like that. I must say, not on this occasion, but we did have a very pliant CBA manager up in Paddington, and he offered to step in once when I was looking with Phil Harrison to buy a 6-wheel Tyrrell, which was on the market for about 1/100th of what it'd be worth today.
Yes. Okay. Well, on that basis, I think we'll drop back now and talk to Peter because Peter's got a lot of, let's call them Peter Brock associated stories. Because, Peter and Peter were very good friends for a long time. I'm going to start off asking the question, about a certain incident that took place at Amaroo Park at a race meeting in which Mr. Brock was a contestant, and Mr. Brock had an accident, of all places, on the entry to pit lane, and there was a rumour getting around that another famous name in motor racing journalism, Mr. Wayne Webster, was the one who actually tipped the bucket, if you'll pardon the pun, and told Mr. Brock that his accident might have been caused by something that took place in the media centre. Now, I'm going to pass it across to Peter, as in McKay, and please fill us in on the rest of that story.
When your nickname's Peter Perfect and you stuff up, you tend to go looking for life buoys, anything to get you out of the jam. What happened? Brocky's come in, it's raining, he's headed into the pits, understeered, whacked the wall. Shit happens. Anyway, Wayne Webster, always on the lookout for a beat-up, goes to Brock and says, I reckon the soap suds from the media centre, which sat above the pit lane entry, got on your tyres and you've slid into the wall. The culprit, Sharon McKay. So Brock's gone, wow, yeah, that's what happened. So that story appeared in the Daily Telegraph the next day, and exonerates Brock because Brock doesn't make stuff-ups. That's simple as that. Sharon hadn't pulled the plug, so she's innocent.
Yes, innocent until proven guilty by Mr. Peter Brock.
Yeah.
By inference.
By inference, anyway. She's got broad shoulders. She's tough. Brock and I got on fine. He was different. I was never a polariser fan, but he was an interesting dude, and he gave Australia a lot of joy. Had a strange reputation in certain quarters, but
well, you just used the magic word a moment ago, the polariser. What do you remember from that era? Because you must have some fairly clear memories of the ups and downs of that whole period.
Yeah, well, it's all a blur. You just can't believe that a few pieces of wire and a magnet can do the things that was supposed to do. I didn't get involved in it. I didn't criticise him for his beliefs there, or maybe I did, but I don't recall doing it. We move on.
It was something that General Motors could not cope with.
Yeah.
It was contrary to all their beliefs in engineering and excellence and research, and it was, here's something in a matchbox that's got a few bells and whistles and wires, and it's going to change the balance of your motor car. It's going to change, and with Peter, it extended also to some of the people that he chose to have surrounding him, and without mentioning any names, they were his counsel, and they didn't come from an engineering background, I can assure you. One example that I can speak of from my knowledge is my experience, the Spa 24-hour race, where Peter took a team over. Alan Moffat was one of his drivers, Lowe from New Zealand, Jim Richards, I think, certainly John Harvey. It was a big campaign, like for a one race, taking cars overseas, doing all that, and taking enough to run two cars, a full crew, all the pit men that you wanted, the whole lot. And Peter was there with, in a really light-hearted manner, like nothing was serious to him about it all. He had a person that would get all the crew up on massage table and give them Reiki massages and stuff like this that would improve the performance of the team for the weekend. And the cars got a little back in the field, and Peter and Bev departed Spa 2 hours before the flag fell. The rest of the team, the drivers, everyone, they're all still out there. The cars were running around. He just seemed to have this loss of interest in and loss of purpose. And it's interesting because he was such a driven person and such a dynamic individual. He just let someone else, rule his thoughts on some occasions. It's an really interesting story. The polarizer was a piece of apparatus that 99.9% of people would not have any trust or belief in, and yet here was a guy who spent all his life working with motor vehicles and becoming such a perfectionist that he was able to look upon this as the answer to performance queries, and eventually he broke away from that and was back to his best. But what it cost him in terms of his standing in the community, specifically the General Motors side of things, who had backed him, from his very early days and was a brand ambassador par excellence. He did a great job for them. He was such a beloved person in terms of his fanatic followers and fans, and they were the major car company in the country, always just a tad ahead of Ford, and yet he got this strange diversion in his thinking, and it is an interesting tale. It's a very interesting tale. It's been written, of course. A lot of people have had their views on it, but there's intrigue there about it at all, and
even to this day.
Even to this day, yeah.
Peter, going back to yourself again, I have clear memories, and you'll remember what year it was, that you had let's call it a disagreement over something that you had written about supercars in the early days. This would have been in the early late 2000s, and that disagreement was with the then boss of supercars, Mr. Tony Cochrane, and the story goes that prior to Bathurst that year, whichever year it was, which I can't remember, you will tell me.
No,
you won't. Okay, a year. Mr. Cochrane decided to pull your accreditation for the upcoming Bathurst race. But on the Thursday, I clearly remember you walking down pit lane, and you didn't have one pass hung around your neck. You had multiple passes. I really didn't count them. And to this day, I absolutely regret not taking a photograph of you with those passes. Now, tell us that little story, or what parts of it you can.
Well, you're right. He pulled my accreditation, and okay, I was going to stay at home, but then I had a few phone calls from team people who said, "Hey, come on up, we'll set you right with the right accreditation." So I got there, and the likes of Bradley Jones, because I did have a few friends in that paddock, and suddenly I'm weighed down by these lanyards and press accreditations around my neck. And Cochrane didn't say anything because he was too smart for that, but one of the rare rare opportunities to be smart, and he took it. Anyway, I just got through that weekend quite okay. Did my work that's what you do, and Cochrane he went on his way, but there was always an opportunity down the track a bit to have another blue with him, because he would always try to undermine us at newspapers and whatever, some of my publications, and I can remember getting a phone call from my boss at the Fairfax, the Sun Herald, saying, "Oh, he's been on to us again. Ignore it," because they did, and I should too.
They were interesting times, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Back to you, Phil. As a team, we talked about you as a team owner in the main game, as it were. But sometime later, you got interested in doing stadium motocross and then stadium super trucks. Now, obviously, that was an idea that you picked up from America?
No, supercross and then monster trucks.
Monster trucks, sorry. I've got to get the terminology right.
Yeah, super trucks they're race buggies that run over a supercross type motocross track, but they're four-wheelers.
Okay. Terminology. Thank
Terminology.
you. Okay. So where did all that start? I mean, that was obviously long after the mid-'80s and you moved on into other
No, it
careers?
wasn't. It was in 1981. The triad struck. It was Phil Harrison, long-time friend, and Alan Horsley, the recently deceased motorsport identity, long-time manager of Oran Park Raceway, and then Mazda Australia honcho, and heavily involved with the Moffat Mazda RX-7 campaigns, which finalised with us all visiting Daytona for the 24-hour race in 1985, which was one last shot after the Group C had closed down, been shut down in Australia. We did the first Supercross in Victoria in 1981. Phil Harrison had been involved with Blair Shepherd, who promoted a couple of events in Australia, with Mike Goodwin, who was the innovator of Supercross in America. He came out and worked with Blair. Peter McKay and myself did the publicity for the first event in Sydney. We were paid a princely sum of $500 each, plus a bonus if we do okay. Well, they filled the joint, and the invoice for the bonus is still outstanding.
One of those.
But from there on, Phil Harrison and Alan and myself went and did Melbourne. We did that for 4 years in a row. It was quite successful, but not in the dollar department, so we were taking risks of rainouts and a whole lot of stuff, and it didn't shape up as being a viable investment. Good crowds, great racing in those early days. A lot of international riders, Americans that went on to win AMA championships and a whole lot of stuff. It was good early, but it didn't turn a dollar, as they say. And then in '86, we got advice that the Sydney Entertainment Centre, which was a major events venue in Australia at the time, since been bowled over. The Elton Johns and everyone else used to arrive there and perform, and we took a few hundred tons of dirt in there and put on a show, and that was successful and went from there. So I ran Supercross Masters for the next 27 years, took it to New Zealand, took it to Sacramento, California, and genuinely filled out my time. and had lots of great experiences and met some fine and decent folk along the way.
Yeah, I remember going to, I think it must have been one of the very early events that you ran at Sydney Entertainment Centre, and we were sitting very close to the front of the seats on the side, and I was
Getting
quite
looked
surprised.
after by the promoter, were we?
Indeed, I was. And I was quite surprised when the first bikes went past and they were about, 10 metres above our heads in midair. It was something I wasn't expecting, I'll tell you quite frankly. But no, they were great days.
And I'll be frank, I don't come from an engineering background. I love motorsport of any nature, but I always, in my working career, and that's what I did for most of my time. It was, like I said, 27 years doing bikes and then monster trucks and other stuff, and running the occasional speedway meeting. We promoted, we were the promoters at Canberra Speedway in its final year. So we got around a bit doing bits and pieces, but I always came from the view that you've got to look at it from a spectator point of view. If the dollars don't come through the gate, there's going to be no gate. And I had very good people that I worked with that could talk about the intricacies of building the track and what the design would be and how the racing, should be conducted from a point of view of the competitor. But I always thought of myself as coming from the spectator. What are they expecting? How are you going to send them away satisfied? How are you going to give them something that they weren't expecting, etc.? And that's the way I approached it. So I was that was my attitude to what my job was as a promoter or whatever else you want to call yourself, producer.
It's interesting, but that harkens right back to when you were a 14-year-old going out to Sydney, the Sydney Speedway Royal. 100%,
110% right in that the shows that we used to see at the Speedway included the likes, like you said, there were Formula One drivers that turned up in the pits, and that. Recently I got into a discussion about the late land speed record holder Craig Breedlove, who was the first man on Earth to break 400 miles an hour, 500 miles an hour and 600 miles an hour. He turned up at the showground one night presenting a trophy. He was a brand ambassador for Goodyear. He presented a trophy, and I've got a really nice photo at home of him presenting it to Ray Revell, who was a veteran of the time, well past his best days, still going around every weekend in an old Offenhauser, the only one in the country at the time. And he bobbed up that night and was the surprise winner. And there's Mr. Breedlove in a suit and tie at the showground presenting a bowl of a silver bowl and goblets to the crowd.
To an old Speedway ace.
Yeah, an old a very famous old Speedway ace. Yeah, but it was every night was a different spectacle. There was serious racing that you could not believe how intense it was. It was highly dangerous. There were lives lost. I reported for the Sun Herald numerous occasions when people were rushed to St Vincent's Hospital, blah blah blah, meaning follow this up, get your police rounds to follow this up, and quite often, too often, there were
fatalities.
There was a funeral later in the week. Yeah. It was high drama. It had everything. Had comedy. It had everything. But it also had some pretty skillful performers and people that went on to be like the John Harveys that went on to be successful in a more mature, refined, dignified method of motor racing, namely open wheelers at Warwick Farm and that sort of stuff.
Up against world champions.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Peter, both of you had in your careers numerous trips around the world to see events with various car companies, oil companies, different sponsors. Just give us one memory of a really great event that you went to and thoroughly enjoyed. Was it a motor race event? Was it a car release? Was it a motor show? You can't tell me that you can't remember anything.
I think the Indy 500, the first Indy 500 I went to in 1978, just about had it all because I went there with three of my friends, Mike Raymond, Philip Christensen, Cole Young, and we were there for a month, not at Indy for a month, but we were in the US for a month, and we just had the best time, culminating for me in seeing, the greatest motor race on earth. And there were other trips that measure up very highly, but that was because it was very early. It was in 1978, I think. It registered very strongly on me.
Yeah, I've had some unbelievable experiences. There's quite a few I'd like to talk about, but I think I should elaborate on Peter's reference to the Indy 500 in 78. I took myself, saved. I was working for the Sydney Morning Herald, but I paid my own way to America. They took a feed from me on the event and a preview, and I was delighted to see that I had a from the USA alongside my byline when I got back. But I do remember quite vividly behaviour of one of our tourists on the 78 trip, and it was I won't say who it was, but his initials are Peter McKay, and
I think I know where this is heading.
Highly excitable. He was highly excitable. We all were. He was so excitable that he didn't do any real damage in the dunny for 10 days, if you get what I'm driving at.
A little plugged up.
A little plugged up. I said, Peter, he said, I'm getting these headaches now. And I said, Peter, you've got to do something, like why not some black coffee? I don't drink coffee. Well, why not have a really, really spiced up Mexican meal? I don't eat Mexican. So this goes on 10 days later, the eve of the race. This is the one we're all
This story's not going to end well, is it?
The 500. Anyway, things start to loosen up the morning of the event, and we see Peter in what was in 78 was regarded as a urinal or a lavatory or a facility. It was like a barn, and it was alongside the press tent, or press shed rather. And so we go in there, and I usher Peter in. I'll keep an eye on you. Just anyway. Unfortunately, all of the closets are without doors. The Americans don't have a problem with, in those days, in the Midwest, they didn't have any suggestion that there should be privacy when you're going through this procedure. So here we've got Peter sitting on his getting rid of bad memories of the previous 10 days, and there are cowhands walking past in bib and brace overalls and straw hats and looking at this Aussie making some really, really serious noises in the closet. And I remember one of them saying, foreigner, foreigner. That was my long-term memory of the 78 race. I can't tell you who won it. I think it was one of the answers, wasn't it? No, it might have been, must have been.
I didn't really expect that question, that line of thought, to actually go down that particular path.
I did.
Yeah, you.
I think I related it at your wedding, didn't I? Or was it your 90th birthday?
I'm going to ask, in retrospect to all of that, and I'm going to come back to something totally different as we're getting towards the end of this exercise, and that is Peter was on the 1979 Repco Round Australia trial with a chap by the name of Dunkerton, and they were a three-man team in a Volvo, of all things. Now, I have vivid memories of various things that took place on that event that affected you personally, but I'll let you tell me the story about how to get left behind at a cattle gate.
Ray, you should credit where credit due. You should acknowledge where this car finished. It was like we all derived much mirth from it. But Peter, can you tell us exactly where it finished? Behind what? The Holden dealer team ran 1, 2 and 3. Where did you finish?
I thank you for the Dorothy Dixer film. It finished 4th and first in class. And, it was the best event I've ever been in terms of memories, fond and otherwise. But yeah, fantastic event. The Repco Round Australia Trial, 15 days, I think, 20,000 clicks, and
so many memories.
Yeah.
You ran fourth outright, didn't you?
Yeah.
You didn't. You sort of downplayed that too much, Peter. Like it was, when you think like the Ford, the Ford Motor Company had those silly whatever they
three
ran.
Cortinas.
The Cortinas that all broke up and whatever. And I mean, there was serious opposition there, and the ones that ran 1, 2, and 3 were virtually unbeatable, and you ran fourth.
Yeah.
Yes.
In a big field.
We're very.
No, you don't. You should highlight that. It should go on your highlight.
Highlight
high
reel.
up too.
That's right,
Just
exactly.
put it right
Yeah, exactly. No, that was. I think it's fair to say that the pair of you carried that Volvo around on your backs. You know what I mean? It was an astonishing feat. But the thought that I wanted
Who was
to
the
remember,
third? Who was the third man?
Jeff Jones, who we met the day before.
Is that right?
Yeah, he
replaced Colin Young.
Yeah.
At the last moment.
Oh gosh, okay.
And we hadn't met him, didn't know much about him, but he came highly recommended.
Walked out of the crowd.
Walked out of
I'll
the
do
crowd.
it.
Sat in the back seat. Oh gosh.
Now you want to get to the
hairdryer. Was that what you're getting to?
No.
No. Give the hairdryer a run.
Well, okay. Well, we'll do both. Okay, we'll do both. Now, you got out at a gate.
Well,
tell the story.
The preamble, was late at night, middle of the night somewhere, out in the mulga, dust and stuff everywhere, and we were following another competitor. So he was churning up a lot of dust, and Ross was driving, and he said, "We've got to get this guy." And a few times we'd come up to gates and had the gate slammed in our face just as we arrived. Anyway, Ross was getting shirtier and shirtier, and we finally saw the opportunity. The dust cleared, and you could see the navigator from the other car rushing to close the gate after that car had gone through. Datsun, I think. So Ross has gunned the Volvo at the closing gate, and not super aggressively, but he bumped the guy out of the way and the gate opened.
Just gently.
Yeah.
And then Ross propped and got around and disappeared. The problem was that I'd got out to close the gate.
And Ross, of course, thought that you were going to stay in the car and the other person in the other car would close the gate.
Yeah, but I'm a well-mannered, well-brought-up guy.
Of course.
If they open the gate, it's up to us to close the gate. Ross never went with that thought. Anyway, the car, the Volvo, is disappearing.
Taillights off
into the distance, into the murk, dust everywhere. So I start jogging down the road forlornly, and then finally I see the headlights coming back. He comes up, spins around. I jump in. Nothing said. Belt up, away he goes, through the gears. And then he says, "Why did you get out?" I said, "I'm well brought up." He opened the gate. I thought I should close it. And then Ross in his way just started laughing, his head off. That was it. Yeah. So I did 20,000 Ks of the Repco trial, 2 on foot.
Yes, that's 19,998.
Yeah.
That's right, exactly. Now, Phil mentioned the hairdryer. Why don't you do the intro for that one?
No, it's not my story. No, it's been debated. It's long thought that amongst Peter's essentials for the trip was a hairdryer.
Well,
I mean, when you get to Borroloola or Meekatharra or where's that place where they let off the atom bomb, which we went through incidentally
exactly,
on that trip.
Yeah. Woomera, that's right.
You look for somewhere to plug in your hairdryer.
Oh,
don't
you do, exactly. Into one of the trees that's just on the side of the road, exactly. It's kind of like looking
True or
at...
false, Peter?
Urban myth.
Your opportunity to
Urban myth.
Urban myth, okay.
Yeah.
Not true?
Not true.
Okay.
But that won't stop you repeating it.
Hey, people come to me and ask me, is it true? Is it true?
Yeah.
So, well, you know the guy, you got to make up your own decision.
Yeah,
but
there's not too many power outlets.
That's total denial, that's fair.
No power outlets. In the
My word is my bond.
Well, look, I think we'll wind it up there only because if we keep on going, we might start to get into legal territory. Phil Christensen, Peter McKay, two of the all-time greats of Australian motor racing journalism. I really thank you both for being here today. I know I'm just pumping you up to your tyres. It's okay, don't worry. You take it as it comes because it'll probably never happen again. It's been a great afternoon. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too, and I hope the people listening will get a little bit of an idea of what it was like behind the keyboard of those typewriters back then when you were writing what was actually going on in front of you. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming.
Pleasure.
Well, friends, that's the conclusion of another episode of the Australian Muscle Car Magazine podcast series. We hope you enjoyed the tales contained herein and look forward to seeing you again soon. In the meantime, be sure to check out musclecarmag.com.au for news stories, news and galleries from the Muscle Car Vault. We add them weekly, as well as brand new digital issues as soon as they become available on the newsstand. Thanks for listening, and as always, safe driving and happy reading from the team at Australian Muscle Car Magazine.